How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we study Daf 60 of Masechta Menachos. Unbelievable. Daf 60 out of 110. Friends, we are making strides in Masechta Menachos. It is unbelievable. Now, Daf 60. First of all, friends, my voice, I'm getting slightly nervous, slightly concerned. Not overly concerned, but slightly concerned. The last thing I want is to lose my voice. Losing my voice on Babble on Talmud is the pits, and the absolute pits. And now I have no buffer, which means I am going to be forced to record with no voice, and that is hard. So friends, hopefully my voice won't get any worse. Friends, Daf 60. We continue. Okay, so yesterday we spoke about by Menachos when there is oil and when there is frankincense, when there isn't oil, when there isn't frankincense, when there's one and not the other, etc. Today we are going to continue on that similar theme with Tenufa and Hagashah, with a particular focus on Hagashah, waving of the mincha, as well as, bringing the mincha to the altar, to the mizbeach. Yeah, what can I tell you? That's really what we're going to talk about today, friends. Hagashah. Hagashah is the main sugya of today's daf. So I suggest that we just jump in. But again, it's going to be similar to yesterday's daf, right? Yesterday we had oil and frankincense. How do we know oil? How do we know frankincense? Maybe we can learn this, maybe kal v'chomer, etc. It's a very similar daf, but with waving and bringing forth with Tenufa and Hagashah, with a particular focus today on Hagashah. Tomorrow we're going to get into Tenufa. Friends, let's jump into Daf Samech of Masechta Menachos. Friends, we begin on Daf Samech of Masechta Menachos at the Mishnah, about, I'd say, 10 or so lines into Daf Samech of Masechta Menachos. Says the Mishnah, Yesh tunis Hagashah ve'ein tunis Tenufa. There are Menachos that need to be brought to the Mizbeach, Hagashah, and there are those that, right, so again, Yesh tunos Hagashah, there are those that require Hagashah, bring them to the Mizbeach, ve'ein tunis Tenufa, but they don't require waving. We are not going to be discussing waving today. That'll be tomorrow. Hopefully we'll, oh gosh, I'm sorry if I'm clearing my throat the whole daf. My apologies. Now, hopefully tomorrow, I haven't looked at the Mishnah tomorrow. I hope that we're going to get a little bit more into the Tenufa and how it works. I think that we are tomorrow going to get into that. Of course, if you haven't yet shown our friend Reb Hillel Lester's demonstration from Purim, he gave a certain approach to Tenufa that I think is worth having a look at. It's in our WhatsApp group. Now, where were we? So what's Hagashah, friends? What's Hagashah? So Be'etzem Hagashah is, if we take, for example, a mincha solis, which I think is generally the easiest mincha to work with. So you have, right, of course we say mikmitzvah va'elach mitzvahs keuna. Only from the kometz and on is the mitzvah of keuna. So you can have the owner, the person who's bringing the mincha. So if we're talking about a mincha solis, so he'll bring some flour, some oil, and he'll take the mixing bowl. It's been ages since we've talked about the mixing bowl and the kometz bowl. We talked about this intensely at the beginning of Masechta Menachos, but then we got into other topics and we're getting back to it now. So the owner brings flour, brings oil, gets a mixing bowl and mixes together the flour and the oil, and then adds some frankincense on top, takes that bowl and hands it over to the Kohen. Now, the Kohen, when he receives the bowl with the flour, the oil mixed together, the frankincense, what he does is Hagashah. He takes the bowl and he brings it to the altar. He brings it to the Mizbeach. If I'm not mistaken, to the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach. And there he will, I think he doesn't, if I remember correctly, he does not have to take the kometz there. I believe, if I remember correctly from earlier in the Masechta, Kmitza could be anywhere in the Azara. But I think just standard would be he would walk over to the altar, I believe the southwestern corner of the altar. Then there he would take a kometz, he would scoop out a kometz of the mincha, place it in the kometz bowl. Now, I think that it is, right, we had seen a machlekes hasugyas now. we had earlier in the Masechta, we had seen about machlokes between the Gemara Menachos and the Gemara Masechta Sota about what happens next. But without getting into those details, essentially from post Kemitza, that is when the burning happens, right? So it'll take the komets and burn that on the Mizbeach, and the Levona will be burnt on the Mizbeach as well. But the Hagashah is the bringing of the Mincha once it's received, once it's handed over into the mixing bowl, right? In the mixing bowl with the flour and the oil, the frankincense is given to the Kohen. The Kohen takes it to the Mizbeach, Hagashah. That's Hagashah. So again, yesh tunis, Hagashah vein tunis tenufa. There are menachos that require Hagashah. They don't require tenufa. They don't require waving. Hagashah ve'tenufa. There are those menachos that require both Hagashah and tenufa. Tenufa v'lo Hagashah. There are menachos that require tenufa but no Hagashah. Lo tenufa v'lo Hagashah. And there are menachos that require neither tenufa nor Hagashah. Azoy. Now, ve'elu tunis Hagashah ve'en tunis tenufa. We are going to list now menachos that require Hagashah but not tenufa. Now, yesterday in the Mishnah, when we were talking about oil and frankincense, we went in the last Mishnah, in the previous Mishnah, we went through all the scenarios. Require oil and frankincense, no frankincense, etc. We went through all the different menachos and how they align. In today's Mishnah, we are only going to be getting through the menachos that require Hagashah but no tenufa. So now, here they are. Ve'elu tunis Hagashah ve'en tunis tenufa. The following are the menachos that require Hagashah but do not require tenufa. Minchas soles. A minchas soles. Okay, I'm not going to explain all of them. Ve'amachvas, ve'amarcheshes, ve'achalois, ve'arakikin. All of these voluntary menachos require bringing them to the altar, but no waving. Minchas kehanim, as well as the mincha of a priest. If a priest brings any of the above listed menachos, it would require Hagashah. Uminchas kohen Mashiach, as well as the minchas chavitin, minchas nochrim, minchas noshin, minchas chote, the mincha of a Gentile, the mincha of a woman, the mincha of a sinner. Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon, minchas kohen minchas kohen Mashiach ein boin Hagashah. Now Reb Shimon disagrees when it comes to the minchas kohanim and the minchas chavitin. He says there's no Hagashah there. Lefish ein boin kmitza, because there is no kmitza. Since there's no kmitza, right? Minchas kohanim, minchas chavitin are burnt in their entirety, are entirely burnt. There's no komets or anything. And when there is no komets, there is no Hagashah. Givaldik. I'm going to chop a shluck of coffee, and then we'll go weiter. It's right now just before 5 a.m. I'm going to see if I can finish recording before I go to my Tani Chavrusa. The last 2 nights we had missile alerts at between 12:30 and 1 a.m. Yeah, last night was about 10 minutes, 5 minutes to 1 in the morning. Today was about 12:30 in the morning. It was actually kind of convenient for me because I was just waking up then, and it kind of war could be a little distracting. So I was just getting up, and I wasn't quite getting up yet. And then then you get the alert, and it's like, okay, I'm up. So, anyways, but it is ultimately, I'd prefer lohein v'lo scharn. Yeah, it ends up being a distraction because then you have to go to the bomb shelter. It's more of it's a distraction. War is a distraction. Says the Gemara, Amar Puppet called Eicha D'Tnan Eser. Tanan, as this is Mam's verbatim what we had yesterday. It says Rapape that whenever we're talking about the menachos and we're talking about loaves of menachos. Now, I don't think we have 50 daf left of Masechta Menachos. We got to get into the nitty gritty of the menachos. When are we going to get into the nitty gritty? I know I'm asking for it now. Why do I have a feeling we're going to get into it soon enough, and it's going to be nitty and gritty? Is my guess. But anyways. So I'm still kind of like trying to grope around here with the nitty gritty of Menachos. Now, I think that Minchas Solis probably doesn't have any loaves, but all the others probably do, right? Minchas Machvas, Marcheshes, Chalis, Rikikin. So those are all going to be 10 loaves each. So it says Rav Papa that whenever the Mishnah is talking about these loaves, it's talking about 10 of them. Eser Tanan. My Kamaj Malon La'afukim v'du Reb Shimon, as we saw yesterday, that Rav Papa is saying that these Mishnayos are unlike Reb Shimon. To Omer Mechza Chalas u'Mechza Rikikin Yovi Kamash Malon Delo. What Reb Papa is saying is that Reb Shimon's shita is that when it comes to a minchas ma'ifesaner, a baked mincha, so there's two varieties of mincha ma'ifesaner, chalas and rakikin. So whereas the Tanakama on Daf Samech Gimel, right now we're on Daf Samech Aleph, so in a few days, on Daf Samech Gimel, the Tanakama says you bring either 10 chalas or 10 rakikin. Reb Shimon says you can even, if you brought 5 and 5, that also works. Says Rav Papa that whenever the Mishnah is talking about loaves, Menachos, we're talking about 10, not 5, not like Reb Shimon. Azoy. How do we know all of these Menachos, right? In our Mishnah, we gave a whole list of Menachos that require Hagashah without Tenufa. Let's learn about that list and how we know it. Zogt the Gemara Menachos. Immediately, how do we know this? The Tanur Rabban and the rabbis taught. Ilu Nemer. Okay, so the following pasuk, and this is going to be our core pasuk by Hagashah. It's a pasuk by a Minchas Marcheshes in Perek Beis of Sefer Vayikra. Who's excited for Sefer Vayikra? Who is excited for Sefer Vayikra? Starts next week. Oh, it's going to be crazy, huh? Sefer Vayikra. Oh my gosh. It's going to be, wow. Cheveh, what an unbelievable year. What an unbelievable time to be alive. Learning Masechta Zvachim, Masechta Menachos. What a treat. A very, very difficult treat. But a treat nonetheless. Come on. Cheveh, we are in, we're the 1%, friends. I'd even say we're the 0.01%. Who learns Zvachim? Who learns Menachos? Who knows what the heck is flying in Sefer Vayikra, Cheveh? We Zachinu. We're the lucky ones. We are the lucky ones. Immediately, how do we know this? The Tanur Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ilu Nemer ve'evesa asher yaise. Asher ye'ose me'ele Hashem v'kriva l'kohen v'gisha. If the pasuk by Minchas Marcheshes, a deeper fried mincha, if the pasuk were to have said ve'evesa asher ye'ose me'ele Hashem, that which will be offered to the Rabban Shalom, i.e. the Kometz, and the Kohen does Hagashah. I would say, you know what requires Hagashah to the altar? Just the Kometz requires Hagashah, bringing it to the altar. Mincha minayin. How do I know though that it's not just the kometz? It's the whole mincha. As I said earlier, the owner takes the flour, takes the oil, mixes them together in the mixing bowl, adds livona, hands that over to the kohen, and the whole mincha is then brought to the mizbeach. The hagashah is the whole mincha, the ganze zach. Mincha minayin. How do you know the ganze zach? Talmud lomar mincha. Right? It says vevesa es hamincha asher yosem me'ele. Okay, so the whole mincha. Minchas chote minayin. Okay, that's all fine and good for voluntary minachos, like the minchas solis, minchas machvas, marcheshes, ma'ifesaner, chalis, rikikin. How do we know about minchas chote, which is an obligatory mincha? Talmud lomar es hamincha. Es is coming to include also minchas chote, which is obligatory. Azoy. Fine. Givaldik. Vidinu. Fact the Gemara. Wait a second. I don't need, or so suggests the Gemara. I don't need the pasuk to tell me es amincha to include a minchas chote. After all, I can use my noggin just fine. So interesting. It sounds like it could be Gzeir Shava. It's obviously not Gzeir Shava. We said Vidinu. We're using our noggins here. It's not Gzeir Shava. It's Gzeir Shava. We wouldn't be able to ask questions on it and prove it wrong. Rather, it's more of a Mematzinu. Right, so I don't know. There's different girsos. It's a funny kind of thing because it sounds like it's a Gzeir Shava, but it isn't. And there's different girsos about what exactly these lines say. So I don't know. I think I'll probably just maybe read what it says here in our text and explain it however I explain it. Hopefully, it makes sense. I mean, I'm being more dramatic than it needs to be. I mean, whatever. It's a little bit of a tricky thing, but I'm just going to read through it and it'll be fine. We'll go weiter. So Vidinu, it's logical. Nemar Hocha, it says by Minchas Chote, Minchas Chova. Okay, V'nemar Hocha, Minchas Nedava. So Minchas Chote is a Minchas Chova, obligatory, right? A person accidentally goes into the Mikdash when he's Tameh, so he's got to bring a Korban Olav Yored, and if all he could afford, a Korban Olav Yored, as we know, is if you can afford it, you bring an animal. If you can't, you bring a bird. If you can't, you bring flour. So if all you can afford is flour, so you're obligated to bring flour. V'nemar ocha minchas nedava, and there's also a minchas nedava, minchas soles, rekikin, etc. All those. My minchas nedava tuna Hagashah, just like by minchas nedava there's Hagashah, so minchas chova tuna Hagashah. So minchas chova also the minchas chote requires Hagashah. Easy enough. Just plain old noggin. We didn't need a pasuk for that. Says the Gemara, wait, it's not so simple. Ma'ale minchas nedava. One second. Minchas nedava requires Hagashah, but also shekein tuna shemen ulevona. Minchas nedavas require Hagashah, but they also require oil and frankincense. Minchas chote doesn't have oil and frankincense, and maybe it also doesn't have Hagashah. Minchas sota tochiach. Okay, fine. Well, what about minchas sota? There's no oil and frankincense by minchas sota, and yet there is Hagashah. So my minchas sota shekin tuna tnufa. Yeah, but minchas sota requires tnufa. Minchas chote does not. So I can understand minchas sota requires tnufa. It also requires Hagashah. Okay, minchas nedava tochiach. Okay, so that's enough for the minchas nedava where there's no tnufa, but there is Hagashah. B'chazar din. Yep, minchas nedava, there's oil and frankincense. Lo rizeh krizev, lo rizeh krizev. All right. So the nature of this is not like the nature of that. And the nature of that is not like the nature of this. I.e., sure, minchas nedava has its quirks. Minchas sota has its quirks. Hatzada shava shaboin, but what they can all agree on is, what they have in common is sheshavu l'kmitza, that there's kmitza. There's kmitza by there's komets by minchas nedava, and there's komets by a minchas sota. V'shavu la'Hagashah, and they also require Hagashah. Afani avi minchas chote, I shall also include a minchas chote sheshavet loy l'kmitza, which also requires kmitza, and therefore teshavelen la'Hagashah. Therefore, minchas chote should require Hagashah as well. So again, I can use my noggin. It was maybe a little bit more complex than we initially tried to paint it, but nonetheless, I got away with using my noggin. One second, it's more complicated yet. That minchas sota and minchas nedava are unique in that they can be. It's the same. It's the same mincha, regardless of your socioeconomic status. A minchas sota is always going to be the same mincha, regardless of what you can afford. A minchas nedava is always going to be the same, regardless of what you can afford. However, tomar b'minchas chote shelo huchshur alavu ba'asher kiba'ani. By a minchas chote, it's only for people who that's all they can afford. Anybody who can afford birds, who can afford animals, brings that instead. So maybe since it's a korban, since minchas chote is a korban which is already a limited in scope korban, it's only for people who that's all they can afford. So maybe there's no Hagashah. Okay, fine. We tried every which angle in order to use our noggins. In the end, our noggins are insufficient. We need a pasuk to teach us es mincha to include a minchas chote. gonna hop another schluck of coffee, and then we'll go weiter on Reb Shimon's sheet over here. Now says Reb Shimon Omer, ve'vesa. Okay, when the pasuk says also by Minchas Marcheshes, this pasuk of Hagashah by Minchas Marcheshes, when it says ve'vesa lerabis Minchas Omer la'Hagashah, it is coming to include the Minchas Omer, that the Minchas Omer requires Hagashah. V'cheinu Omer, similarly it says ve'vesem es Omer reishes tzirchem el akoin. So it says ve'vesa by Hagashah, and it says ve'vesem by the Minchas HaOmer, and therefore, just like ve'vesa by Minchas Marcheshes requires Hagashah, so too by the Minchas HaOmer requires Hagashah. Ve'kriva, and when the pasuk also says by Minchas Marcheshes ve'kriva l'rabos Minchas Sota, that includes Minchas Sota le'Hagashah. V'cheinu Omer ve'kriv oseh el mizbeach, that it says by Minchas Sota that the Kohen brings the Mincha to the Mizbeach. So get valdig. So the Mincha. So it says V'ikriv here by Minchas Marcheshes as well as by Minchas Sota to say that it requires Hagashah. V'dinu. One second. Why do I need the pasuk of V'ikriva to say that a sota requires Hagashah, Minchas Sota requires Hagashah? Can't I just use my noggin? V'dinu uma Minchas Chote she'ena tuna tenufa tuna Hagashah. If after all Minchas Chote, which does not require tenufa, does require Hagashah, Minchas Sota she'tuna tenufa enu din she'tuna Hagashah. So Minchas Sota, which requires tenufa, waving it together with the coin, certainly it should require therefore Hagashah. Ma'ale Minchas Chote shekein ba'a chitin. One second. But Minchas Chote is a fancier kind of, a more elaborate kind of, well, I don't know if elaborate, but a higher, a more proper mincha, because it's from wheat. And therefore I can understand, okay, it's a wheat mincha, it requires Hagashah. Minchas Omer, where am I? Okay, so but Minchas Sota, however, is where okay, got it, right. Yeah, logic. When there's so much logic, you can get lost in the logic. Anyway, so since I got lost, just in case anybody else got lost, I'm just going to do a quick, where the heck are we kind of thing. Reb Shimon is learning out that Minchas Sota requires Hagashah from a pasuk. The question is, can we just use our noggin? And that is, since a Minchas Chote, which does not have tenufa, does require Hagashah, Minchas Sota, which has tenufa already, should certainly require Hagashah. To which we say, yeah, but we can't learn out from Minchas Chote, because Minchas Chote is a wheat mincha. Whereas Minchas Sota is only a barley mincha. Wheat is considered a fancier thing than barley. Barley is generally considered animal food, which is precisely why a sota, her mincha, is barley. That to represent that, well, she did an allegedly did an animalistic thing by having an affair. So therefore her mincha is an animalistic mincha of barley. So therefore we wanted to say that since Minchas Chote requires Hagashah, certainly Minchas Sota should require Hagashah, not necessarily. Minchas Chote is wheat. It's kind of a higher level, higher class mincha, and therefore, okay, it also requires Hagashah. But Minchas Sota, which is merely a barley animal food-esque mincha, maybe it doesn't require tenufa Hagashah. So now Minchas HaOmer tochiach, fine, but Minchas HaOmer, however, is also a barley mincha, and it requires Hagashah. So therefore, Minchas Sota, even though it's barley, it also requires Hagashah. Ma'ale Minchas HaOmer shekein tuna shemen u'levona. Yeah, but Minchas HaOmer requires oil and frankincense. Minchas Sota does not. Minchas chote tochiach. Okay, well, minchas chote has no oil or frankincense, and it requires agosha v'chazor adin. Yeah, but that's wheat. Lo rizeh krizeh v'lo rizeh krizeh. Minchas chote is unique in its own way. Minchas omer is unique in its own way. Hatzad shava shaboin, but what they share between them, sheshava l'kmitza, that they require kmitza, v'shava l'agosha, and they require agosha. Afani avi minchas sota, I will also include a minchas sota, sheshav sot loin l'kmitza, that also requires kmitza, to shava loin l'agosha, so it should also require agosha. Malatzad shava shaboin, shkein lo huchshu lavu kemach. Yes, however, both the minchas ha'omer as well as the minchas chote are kemach. Are soulless. Soulless is the most fine of the flour. So again, those are kind of higher class. Even the minchas ha'omer, which is barley, but it's finely ground. It's soulless. Whereas again, the minchas sota is kind of more an animalistic kind of thing. It's barley, and not just and not only that, but it's also kemach. It's a coarser barley flour. Therefore, it's a lower kind of thing. Maybe it doesn't require agosha. Again, malatzad shav shaboin, minchas chote and minchas omer shekein lo huchshu lavu kemach. You can't offer them kemach. They have to be soulless, a finer flour. Tomar b'minchas sota shuchshu lavu kemach, but a minchas sota can even be kemach, and therefore maybe it does not require agosha. Talmud lo marve kriva. Okay, in the end, our noggins were insufficient, and we need to have the pasuk of ve'ekriva to include minchas sota. Gewaldig. Take another shluck of coffee, and then we'll have a look at Reb Yehuda's shita. Now comes Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda Omer says, Reb Yehuda ve'vesa. When it comes to ve'vesa, l'rabos minchas sota. So as Reb Shimon learned out from ve'vesa minchas omer, Reb Yehuda learns out from ve'vesa minchas sota. Now agosha, to say that minchas sota requires agosha v'chinu omer, and similarly, of course, it says by minchas sota ve'hevi as korbana aleo, that ve'hevi, I think here is referring to the husband. Ve'hevi as ishto alakohen. I'm reading the pasuk ve'hevi as korbana aleo, and he brings a korban, whatever. It's talking about the minchas. So by the minchas sota, it says ve'hevi. However, minchas omer does not require a pasuk. We can use our noggins according to Rabbi Yehuda. My time out call me dinokas, so I can use my noggin. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says I don't need to learn minchas omer. I can use my noggin for that, and therefore ve'vesa is coming to teach minchas sota. Here comes our noggins. Umaminchas chote she'ena tuna tnufa tuna agosha. If when it comes to minchas chote, which does not require tenufa, but it does require agosha, minchas omer, certainly then when it comes to minchas omer, shetuna tenufa, which does have tenufa, eno din shetuna agosha, certainly then it should require agosha, not so quick. Minchas chote shkin ba chitin. Minchas chote is wheat. Minchas omer is barley. So minchas chote also is wheat, and it requires agosha. Minchas omer is barley. Maybe it doesn't require agosha. Minchas sota tochiach. Okay, well minchas sota is barley, and it requires agosha. Minchas sota shkin ba levira oven. But minchas sota is more unique and stringent in that it is coming to check if someone sinned. To maskeres avoni. It is checking to see if someone sinned. That's a pretty unique kind of thing. It's a mincha that checks to see if somebody sinned. Okay, it also requires agosha. Okay, fine. But maybe minchas omer doesn't require agosha. Minchas chote tochiach. Okay, so now for minchas chote, which isn't coming to be mevayer avon, and still it requires agosha because radin. Yes, minchas chote is wheat. Lo rizeh krizeh v'lo rizeh krizeh. So minchas chote has its shtick, and minchas sota has its shtick, but what they have in common is Hatzad shaboin shekein shavu l'kmitza v'shavu l'agosha. Minchas sota and minchas chote require kmitza and require agosha. Afani avi minchas omer, I will also bring in the minchas omer sheshav saloin l'kmitza shavaloin l'agosha, that requires a kometz and also requires agosha. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda argues that the Minchas Omer can just be learned out using our noggins. We don't need to use a pasuk, and therefore Vevesa is referring to Minchas Sota, not Minchas Omer, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Reb Shimon Prich Achi. Reb Shimon, however, says not so fast. Reb Shimon says, wait a second. We can't learn out Minchas Omer from the Tzad HaShaveh between Minchas Sota and Minchas Chote. Why not? Because Minchas Sote can be Minchas Chote. Did I just say Sote? Honestly, it's a good idea. Sote means Sota and Chote. That's genius. But I'm not going to do that to you because it would also be very confusing. This is not the kind of daf that we want to confuse things. Maybe some other dafs we can have a little fun. We gotta keep things clear on this stuff. We cannot learn out Minchas Omer from the combo of Minchas Sote, Minchas Sota and Minchas Chote. Why? Because Minchas Sota and Minchas Chote can be offered any and every day of the year. Now, obviously, we would hope, which is going to be Reb Yehuda's response, but honestly, obviously, we would hope that you're not bringing a Minchas Chote or Minchas Sota every day of the year, but it can be. It can. So therefore, Reb Shimon's argument is that you can't learn out Minchas Omer, which is an annual thing, from Minchas Chote and Minchas Sota, which you can literally offer them 365 days of the year. So they require a Hagashah, but I can't assume from that Minchas Omer requires a Hagashah. Therefore, Reb Shimon says, I need to learn that from a pasuk. Now, Reb Yehuda responds, Adarabba, Hamitzu Yitfei, Fakert. As funny as it may sound, the Minchas Omer, which is annual, is actually more common because it's every single year. I mean, I would hope that a woman is never in her whole life going to be accused of being a sota, let alone every single year, more than every single year, right? A minchas chote, I would hope people aren't bringing minchas chotes because they're going to the Beis Hamikdash when they're tamei. I mean, I would hope that this is something that that people will avoid entirely. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda argues, in theory, you can offer it every day of the year, but in practice, I would not only hope but also expect that people are not bringing, or I would expect that the Minchas HaOmer, which is annual, is far more common than the Minchas Chote and the Minchas Sota. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda argues that you can learn out Hagashah from Minchas HaOmer from Minchas Chote and Minchas Sota. Right? The Minchas HaOmer is more common. Hanoch Zimnin Delomish Kachas LaKlau, because Minchas Chote, Minchas Sota, it's certainly certainly quite possible that they're not going to be offered at all. Now, or maybe after all that, maybe Vevesa is not teaching us about Minchas Sota. Maybe Vevesa is not teaching us about Minchas Omer. Maybe Vevesa is teaching us maybe what Vevesa is coming to say, is coming to include that a individual can offer more than just the menachos that have been offered. Well, offered is probably not a good word to use in this context of talking about offerings that are given as options. The psukim talk about minchas soles, machmas macheshes, chalas v'kikin of wheat. What about can an individual say, you know what, I'm going to bring a minchas soles, but not of flour, of barley? Maybe Vevesa is coming to include that an individual can even decide, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley. Again, Oeno Omer, Vevesa Ella, what Vevesa is saying, Sheyochin Misnade, Bumevi Mincha Acheres, Chutz Me'ele, Sheba Inin. Maybe an individual could bring a mincha that is other than what is already listed in the Psukim V'dinu. And I'll make the following argument. Tzibur maybe mincha min achitin chova, or maybe mincha min achita min asarin chova. There are considered to be 3 communal minachos. The reason I say 3 is, the reason why I say considered is because there is also the minchas nisachim, but Anyways, I think when we think about the communal mincha offerings, I think we think about the lechem haparim, the shtei alechem, and the minchas haomer. The lechem haparim and the shtei alechem are wheat. The minchas haomer is barley. So when it comes to, again, tzibur maybe mincha minachitin, the congregation brings a korban mincha from wheat, chova as an obligation, maybe mincha minasorin chova, and also barley minachis chova, right? The minchas haomer. So af yachid will say that just like the congregation offers wheat and barley, also an individual shemevi mincha minachitin nedava, that an individual could bring a voluntary mincha of wheat, yavi mincha minasorin nedava, maybe could also bring a voluntary barley offering. Talmud Omar. So to say that no, don't learn that way. No voluntary barley offerings. Talmud Omar eile. It's only the menachos that have been listed in the pasuk. Oh, eno omer eile ela leomer hare olai mincha shemevi chamishason. Wait, the Gemara says 1 second. Maybe what eile is coming to teach is that if a person says, I'm going to bring a korban mincha and doesn't specify, maybe it means he has to bring all 5 of them. Maybe that's what eile teaches. Not to exclude barley, but to say that if somebody says, I'm going to bring a korban mincha, you have to bring eile, you have to bring all 5. Tamlo me eile. It says, me eile ratza achas, maybe ratza chamishason, maybe. No, it says, because what does the pasuk say? It says, ve'veis as mincha asher ye'oset me eile. From these. Not all 5, just one of them. And therefore, yeah, it's not saying that you bring all 5, you just bring one of them. Yeah, so the me eile is saying you just bring one of them, and eile is saying wheat minachis, not barley minachis. Take another shlook of coffee. I'm mamish going to end of the coffee. And wow, we're mamish. Anachnu mamash betov. Anachnu mamash betov. We're doing good over here. Yeah, we should be able to finish up soon. Yeah, it's 5:30. I asked my chavusa if we could push off to 5:45. Let's see, what did he say? He said, sure. Aw, what a guy. Okay. Good friend. Okay. Reb Shimon Omer, says Reb Shimon. Es ha-mincha l'rabbeis sha'ar minachis. Okay. So Reb Shimon had said that es ha-mincha in... Oh, one second. We had said earlier, right, that was the very beginning of our whole noggining. Es ha-mincha includes minchas chote. Now it says Reb Shimon, similarly, Reb Shimon Omer es ha-mincha l'rabbeis sha'ar minachis. It includes other minachis. Kigon, for example, minchas nochrim, Gentile minachis, minchas noshim, women minachis. Rashi says also minchas chote, like we included earlier. The Hagashah, that there is Hagashah. Yochel shani mar be'ap shtei alechem v'lechem hapanim. What about shtei alechem? What about lechem hapanim? Should those be included, that they require Hagashah? Talmud Omer me eile. From these. To exclude lechem hapanim and shtei alechem. Mari is the rabbis shar menachos lo shtei alechem. Why include these other menachos, like a minchas chote, for example, and exclude lo shtei alechem v'lechem hapanim, to exclude shtei alechem v'lechem hapanim? The answer is mar be'ani shar menachos. The reason why I include these other menachos in Hagashah, sheyesh me'em leishim, because part of them, kometz, is burnt on the mizbeach. Umotza'ani shtei alechem v'lechem hapanim, to the exclusion of shtei alechem and lechem hapanim, she'ein me'em leishim, none of them are burnt. The bazichin are burnt, sure. The kivsei atzeres are burnt, sure. But the shtei alechem and the lechem hapanim themselves are not burnt. V'alo minchas nesochim kula la'ishim. Okay, but what about minchas nesochim, for example? A mincha offering that's brought with like a korban shlam, korban ola, kula la'ishim, they are entirely burnt on the mizbeach. Yachol yehei tuna Hagashah, maybe they should require Hagashah. They're entirely burnt on the mizbeach. Talmud Omer ve'kriva, that it will be offered, it, to the exclusion of minchas nesachim. They are not hagashad. But didn't we already learn out from v'hikriv to talk about minchas sota? V'hikriv v'hikriva. Well, it could have just said v'hikriv, and that would have been enough to learn minchas sota requires Hagashah. V'hikriv would have been enough, but it says v'hikriva, so it teaches both. V'hikriv that Minchas Sota also requires Hagashah, and Bikriva is to exclude Minchas Nisachim. Wait a second, why are we excluding Minchas Nisachim from Bikriva? Maybe it's to exclude the Shar Menachos. My ba'ani Shar Menachos, I will include Shar Menachos, Shabos, Biglal Atzman, because they come on their own. Minchas Soles, Machvas, etc., they come on their own, as opposed to Motziani Minchas Nisachim, to the exclusion of Minchas Nisachim, She'ena Ba Biglal Atzman, does not come on its own, it comes together with a korban. V'aloi Minchas Kohanim u Minchas Kohen Mashiach Bos Biglal Atzman. Okay, but Minchas Kohanim, right? Any of these menachos, Minchas Soles, Machvas, Macheshes, etc., that's brought by a Kohen, so they are brought on their own. Or Minchas Kohen Mashiach, the Minchas Chavitin, brought on their own. Bos Biglal Atzman. And now this is Reb Shimon, who had said in the Mishnah that Minchas Kohanim and Minchas Chavitin, they are excluded from Hagashah. So it says, Yachol Yu Tunos Hagashah, would they require Hagashah? Tamlom Vigisha, that it will be brought to the Mizbeach, not the Minchas Kohanim and not the Minchas Chavitin. Again, this is the Shita of Reb Shimon, who says that they are excluded from Hagashah. But 1 second, Vigisha is not needed to exclude Minchas Kohanim and Minchas Chavitin. It is teaching us that the Minchas Marcheshes requires Hagashah. Vigisha is teaching us Hagashah. Well, to teach Hagashah, it could have just said Vigish. Vigisha is coming to exclude Minchas Kohanim and Minchas Kohen Mashiach, i.e. Minchas Chavitin. Umarisa l'rabos shar menachos l'hotzi Minchas Kohanim Minchas Kohen Mashiach. 1 second. Why is Vigisha, it, excluding Minchas Kohanim Minchas Chavitin? Maybe it excludes shar menachos. Answers the Gemara, Mar ba'ani shar menachos, I will include other menachos for Hagashah, sheyesh men le'ishim uvos biglal atzman ve'yesh men le'kohanim. Because other menachos, the kometz is burnt on the mizbeach, and they come on their own, and the shirayim go to the kohanim. Umotzi ani shtei alechem lechem aponim, and therefore, as like kind of like a review, we exclude lechem aponim and shtei alechem she'en mehem leishim, because none of them are. It's not burnt on the mizbeach at all. Uminchas Nisachim, and we also exclude Minchas Nisachim, she'ein ba biglal atzma, because it doesn't come on its own, only with the korban. Minchas Kohanim, Minchas Kohen Mashiach, and I also exclude Minchas Kohanim, Minchas Kohen Mashiach, she'ein me'en the Kohanim, because the Kohanim don't get any of the shirayim, because the Minchas Chavitin and the Minchas Kohanim, any mincha brought by Kohen, as we know, is entirely burnt on the mizbeach. Nothing goes to the Kohanim. Now, finishes the Gemara, Beherim Yachol Bechli, when it says Veherim in the pasuk by the Minchas Marcheshes, it says Veherim. So is it possible that you take a vessel and dunk it in and remove whatever removing from there? Well, of course we know that that menachos are talked about in the 2nd chapter of Sefer Vayikra and also in the 6th chapter of Sefer Vayikra. So in the 2nd chapter it says Veherim mimenu, etc. But in the 6th chapter, it's more explicit. So just like in the 6th chapter, we're talking about a kometz with one's hand, with the kohen's hand. So also in the 2nd chapter, we're talking about separating a kometz from the mincha with one's hand, not using a vessel. Friends, that was Daf Samich of Masechta Menachos. Friends, be'etzem on Daf Samich, we learned about Hagashah be'etzem. Right? We had a similar Mishnah to yesterday, where yesterday we talked about oil and frankincense. Today we talked about waving and bringing to the Mizbeach, Tenufa and Hagashah. But we really focused today on Hagashah, on menachos that require Hagashah and do not require Tenufa. Tomorrow we're going to move on to Tenufa. And yeah, what can I tell you? I mean, we gave a list of menachos that require Hagashah without Tenufa, and then we started learning out all sorts of things. But I mean, the list was in the Mishnah. You know, Minchas Soles, Machvas, Marcheshes, Chales, Rikikin, and then Minchas Kohanim and Minchas Chavitin according to the Kohen, according to the Tanakama, etc. And that was really what we talked about in today's daf. Friends, have a great day. Cheers.